Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Artificial DM. We are going to be diving into another RPG horror story. So we've heard of a lot of DMs that end up having balancing issues, DMPCs, or just tend to be a little bit creepy. Well, this DM has it all wrapped together. Granted, I will say, he's not the worst DM I've ever heard about, and he's got room for redemption. But I'm sure it was a terrible experience. Maybe we should make a DM boot camp. Everybody who wants to be a DM gets sent to the boot camp, they get trained how to properly run their games, and then they get to go out and try to run D&D games. Or at the least, they should pick up the books and read them. Or hell, pull up YouTube and look up some videos. There are plenty of resources out there on how to be a great GM, trademarked. Hopefully, this DM ended up using those after putting his players through this experience. So let's go ahead and get into this RPG horror story. The Tale of the Sci-Fi and Combat-Obsessed Dungeon Master by Thespian. Hello all, I'm writing this mainly out of a desire to get this experience off my chest, and also share with you all of the confusing events that occurred, and the epic explosion of its conclusion. I was also inspired by watching RPG horror story YouTubers, Crit Crab, Artificial DM, and Den of the Drake, to share my own tale of horror and woe. This is going to be stupid long, but I promise it will be worth it. Let's get into this, shall we? I joined a group on Roll20 just over a year ago, in a game of D&D 5e, back when quarantine was just getting off the ground. This would be my very first experience actually playing the game, and although it was going to be with a group of strangers online, I was very excited. I was put through a bit of a vetting process in the beginning to make sure I was legit, and then I was added to the campaign. There are lots of players in my story, and for the sake of anonymity, I'll be referring to them as the classes their characters played. Our party consisted of me, a warlock, monk, fighter, rogue, and sword mage, a homebrew class. And of course, our DM, the main problem and the reason why the group fell apart. When we started the campaign, it only consisted of me, the monk, and the rogue. There were other players, but they dropped quickly afterward, so they aren't that relevant to the story. The fighter and sword mage were introduced together at a later point, and stayed with us until the bitter end. Honestly, there wasn't really a problem with the campaign at first. It all was pretty bog standard, but fun nonetheless. Since this was my first real D&D game, I tried not to make any crazy expectations and keep an open mind. This also was our DM's first time running a homebrew world, and he did a fine job of it. At least in the beginning. There isn't really one big moment that sticks out in my mind when I started losing interest. It was just a snowball effect that kept getting larger and larger, to the point where I was playing Mario Kart during the sessions. I was so mind-numbingly bored. The DM also kept getting worse and worse the more time went on. I'll rattle off a few of the big offenses here. The DM didn't really know how to balance encounters for a party without a tank or a healer. This is the main reason why the fighter and sword mage were added to the group, to get some more damage per second. However, the DM felt that we really needed a healer, so he gave the party a literal heal bot. His words, not mine. This turned out to be a Warforged cleric character, who became a bit of a DMPC for a while there. Though it wasn't the DM's intention, it was clear that is what she turned into. She was an Aegis-like character from Persona 3, an innocent female robot who didn't understand human social graces. However, after a time, the DM wanted her to change subclasses because he wanted her to be more powerful, going from a life cleric to a tempest cleric. So he gave us this big scene where a literal god parted the clouds and blessed this all-important DMPC, reminding her of her true calling. Me and all the other players just sat and watched as this happened, no input from us. It was like a literal video game cutscene. We talked to the DM afterward, suggesting that she shouldn't change subclasses because we were worried she was becoming a DMPC. And our DM allowed this, though he put up a bit of a fuss about it. allowing this character to be puppeted by the monk player in combat. However, whenever this NPC wasn't around us at all times, the DM got kinda pissy. He would mention that the NPC could leave at any time if we don't appreciate her enough, so we better not leave her behind. This NPC also ended up being the pilot of our very own airship, with the ability to merge with it and merge out whenever she wanted, giving her even more relevance to the story and adding to her OP-ness. Come on, DM. Honestly, the player stepped up and said, "Hey, DM, listen, please don't make her a DMPC. You listened, and sure, you said you agree, but obviously you didn't. DMPC, don't make player characters." Over time, the DM clearly wanted a more sci-fi driven setting and story. Trains, arcane guns, turrets, sentinels, trucks, and even motorcycles made an appearance in this initially very fantasy-driven setting. He was clearly inspired by Halo and Destiny, to the point of creating his own homebrew race for the Sangheli, or Elites, which were overpowered by the way. They had a 3+ bonus to strength, along with another +1 stat. I think they also had a stupid amount of resistances, but it's been a while, so take that with a grain of salt. He also gave my character an arcane gun directly from Destiny, and the DMPC was named after a character from Destiny as well. I'd normally be chill with taking elements from other stories, especially in D&D, but none of us signed up for a sci-fi driven story, with fighting tons of Warforged robots and fucking around with computers and terminals. We all signed up for Dungeons and Dragons. It was a clear disconnect, and it was the main reason I lost interest over time. The DM clearly targeted players and showed favoritism. He targeted the rogue the most, treating him like a tank and wailing on his character whenever possible. The rogue also, never, not once, was able to use Thieves' Cant or Thieves' Tools. The one time he tried to steal things, he was immediately shot down and almost arrested. And once the fighter stopped playing like the DM wanted him to, he got shafted as well. I was the target of obvious favoritism, receiving plot hook after plot hook, and never getting hit, while our monk character had to entirely respect her character in order to get even a hint of a character hook. I also received lots of spells and magic items. He would often draw special attention to my dreams through sequences where he would roleplay as my patron, while the rest of the party just had to sit there and watch. Which, yeah, warlocks getting private patron-focused scenes semi-regularly is a cool thing, but it made me uncomfortable. The entire session was basically stopped just for me and my character, and I really didn't like it. The Sword Mage also got a lot of favoritism, with the DM openly claiming that his character was his favorite later on, and giving him an assortment of magic items and boons. It got to the point where we made jokes about how many items and bonuses he got. There were lots of moments with him that just plain skeeved me out. The DM had this shopkeeper character that showed up multiple times, and each time he appeared, he aggressively hit on both me and Monk's characters. We were the only 2 female members in the group. This made me uncomfortable, and I'm sure it made Monk uncomfortable too. The Monk's character was 17 at the start of the story, and once that was revealed to the rest of us, the DM made the shopkeeper character apologize for being a creeper. But as soon as the Monk character had a birthday and turned 18 in-game, she got a letter from the same shopkeeper character claiming that she was legal now, so he could continue his skeevy behavior. Also, I mentioned in my backstory that my warlock character was bisexual. This is mainly because I'm bisexual in real life, and I self-project onto my characters, like, a lot. It was mentioned in one sentence in a 2-page backstory document. The DM managed to single this one sentence out, and I got a lot of weird comments from him about it. He had asked me, "Oh, why did you make your character bisexual? Does your character just appreciate the female form then?" Or other weird things. I definitely didn't feel comfortable coming out right then, so I gave an in-character reason why. Which, by the way, I don't think I should have to give a reason for my character's sexuality, but whatever. He also gave me a weird vibe whenever we would talk privately. He mentioned me driving over to meet him so he could teach me sword fighting techniques, since we lived in the same state. I blamed COVID as an excuse not to drive an hour over toward his place, but the fact he even asked me this out of the blue without him even knowing what I looked like made me uncomfortable. Overall, he said and did skeevy things from time to time, and it made my sympathy for him decrease the more we played together. Showing favoritism to your players is terrible. Obviously, sometimes one player is going to get something better than other players, but when you're working on crafting the story and getting your players to interact with the world, you want to be able to show balance there. You want to make sure that the players have the opportunity to dive into their backstories, flesh out their characters, and become the legends they're preparing to be. And I shouldn't have to look into the arcane arts to explain, don't be a creeper. The things that this DM is doing just scream groomer. It kind of reminds me of one of those Discord mods that's like, "Kitten, I want you to be able to send me feet pics as soon as you're done with this homework." Very safe call on OP to be like, no. The DM also liked to change things about our characters without any input or clearance from us beforehand. For instance, our rogue character was given the belt of Dwarven Kind that would give him a significant stat boost, but the DM informed him that he would be forced to grow a beard if he wore the belt, despite the fact that the rogue was playing an Aarakocra. And it stated plainly that they can't grow beards. It didn't matter. Our rogue was getting a beard, and he had no say in it. He couldn't even flavor the kind of beard he wanted for his character. The DM insisted it was a full red ginger dwarven beard. P.S. I know the text of the item says it makes you grow a beard, but A, our DM was being really pushy with it. And B, the text states they'll only grow a beard if they're able to do so. And it wasn't just this moment. Our fighter wanted his armor to look a certain way, like Russell Crowe in Gladiator kinda look. But our DM forbade it, claiming that armor like that wasn't historically accurate. Never mind that the fighter was a leonin, a literal lion man, historical accuracy was more important. When I changed my subclass to a genie warlock, because Tasha's had just come out, he forbade me from being in the service of a fire genie, despite the fact that's what I wanted. He made my patron an air-water genie hybrid, and in order to make them more accurate lore-wise, made them pull pranks on my character a fair bit. I was fine with this, up until I was trying to have a roleplay scene, and he interrupted me, in service of showing off more pranks. Ah yes, historical accuracy in my D&D games. Also, what is he talking about the Jinn? Jinn are vile and evil. They're not fey tricksters that come in and do flittering little pranks. His homebrew rules were really out of whack. Some of his ideas were cool, such as his one rule, where if a character failed all 3 death saves and died, they were allowed one last turn without any restrictions to fuck up whatever killed them, and then they would be dead for good. It was a cool rule that will come up later, but his other rules were questionable to say the least. I already mentioned the Sangheili race, but there were more. For example, one time I decided to take Suggestion spell on level up, and once the DM saw it on my sheet, he posted a new ruling for the spell, basically nerfing it to hell and back, making it only last a minute, and a few other negatives which I can't remember clearly. Now, I'd be fine with this if he had come up to me before this and talked to me about it. I was a new player at the time, so I didn't really know how broken the Suggestion spell was. Because he didn't, I felt targeted and singled out, as I'd thought I had chosen a wrong spell somehow. And now I was stuck with a spell that was essentially useless until we leveled up again, and then I could swap it out. He did this with the spell Goodberry too, making so if you ate multiple berries, you would throw up, get poisoned, and take exhaustion levels. He made this ruling after he tried to get another player to join who wanted to be a druid. That never ended up happening, but it still felt pretty targeted. His fights were very, very punishing. someone nearly died every time, and as the campaign went on and we got higher level, the enemies just kept getting stronger and stronger. Every single session was chock full of combat for weeks on end. And I do not come to D&D for the combat, so this whole experience was very draining for me. He also got more lazy as he went along too, not using any kind of maps, and just looping one track for the music over and over. The worst part about all of this is that he would ask for feedback and ways to improve, which we would give. We would ask for more maps, more exploration, less combat. We gave positive reinforcement whenever we could. One of my favorite sessions was one where we roleplayed for a majority of the time, and I made no secret of that fact. Everyone was putting in their own input, but it's like he didn't take any of it to heart. He eventually caved on maps once we bullied him enough about it, but most of our complaints were never addressed. I'm sure at this point you're probably asking, why didn't you just leave? Well, a large part of why I stayed is because of the other players. The other people were really fun to play with, and even more fun to just talk with during breaks. I became pretty close friends with most of the other players in the campaign, and we still talk. They are the main reason I didn't want to leave. That, and my character was getting a lot of attention in terms of plot hooks. I'm talking like every little thing from my backstory was pulled out and being used, and I get really invested in my characters, so I really wanted to see where the DM was going with it, and what the conclusion to those arcs would be. That was probably selfish on me, looking back on it. But again, I mentioned that all this stuff wasn't apparent from the start. A lot of his negatives only became worse, or showed up over the entire year I played with him. So I toughed it out, and I made myself believe that this is just how D&D is like. It was my first game ever, after all. And with that, Thespian goes into detail about why they split the story into two parts. Now joining a game and expecting it to be fantasy, and then midway through the DM was like, we're changing to sci-fi. Yeah, that would be a reason to lose interest in the game. But what I think is crazy is that the DM had all of these resources at his fingertips. He would talk with the players and be like, hey, what do you guys want? They would actually give him good feedback and request. And then he would completely ignore them? That's crazy. He didn't actually want to improve. He just wanted validation that his story is coming together well. Go write a book. And I know a lot of you will probably side and say, well, it was her own fault for not leaving the game. It is hard to leave a game when your friends are also playing. Yes, he's creepy, but I can totally see why she continued to play. So, with that, let's go ahead, we're gonna dive into part 2 and finish up the rest of this tale. Hello again, everyone. Here is the complete ending to this sordid tale. As promised, enjoy. Let's talk about the beginning of the end. In October, the fighter decided to run a Halloween one-shot and invited all of us to take part. For this one-shot, the DM made an extremely min-maxed character, a sorcerer paladin multi-class, and made him aggressively hit on both me and Monk's characters yet again. He stated the reason why he hit on us so aggressively like that was because he was trying to be in character. He did apologize afterward, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. He also would go into extreme detail, describing every single one of his actions in combat, further slowing down the pace, which, usually, I wouldn't mind. I love it when people flavor their attacks. It's one of the highlights of combat for me. However, making us all sit there while he rasped poetically about every single one of his characters' same sword slashes for the 15th time just really tried my patience. He even interrupted the DM and other people's turns whenever he forgot to describe even one of his many attacks. I won't go into too much more detail about this one-shot, but I will mention that the DM ended up one-shotting the boss wizard in one hit, dealing like 200 plus damage to him in one turn. The reason why this marked the beginning of the end was due to me. The one-shot really inspired me to run my own game, and I decided on doing a Christmas-themed one-shot in December. The DM told us he was going to do a holiday session with our campaign characters, but he said I was welcome to have a separate one-shot if I wanted to. I went full in on this, creating detailed maps and taking care in picking out the soundtracks and music. I mentioned that it was going to be more puzzle focused, and the DM kinda gave me shit for it. He told me that puzzles were kinda bullshit, and that the group probably wouldn't be able to decipher them. I assured his worries, and told him that if they really got too difficult, I could always move on or give them an easier solution. But he still doubted me, and dug his heels in the sand, not budging from his view that puzzles were stupid, and that they would be much too difficult. So, I'll admit, I kowtowed to his demands. I made my initially complicated puzzles into easy-to-solve riddles, because I really wanted everyone in the group to have a good time. My worst fear was that my group would come out of my session hating it, so I did my best to make a one-shot they all would like, even if it meant scrapping some of my plans. Everyone in our group made characters, and the DM used a character that he was already using in the campaign as an NPC. Our fighter made an orc wizard character for the one-shot, specifically to piss off our DM, who hated orc wizards as a concept, and made no secret about it. The fighter was really done with the DM at this point, especially after the Halloween session. But what's important to the story is that our rogue player made a non-binary elven bard character for the one-shot, which I was fine with. As I mentioned before, I'm queer myself, and I learned after the fact that a lot of the group actually was queer as well. Now, all that I'm about to say I learned after the fact. If I'd known about this sooner, I would have done or said something about it. After Rogue talked about his one-shot character to all of us, he got a message from DM. DM told him that he just couldn't bear to play in the same campaign as the Rogue's non-binary character, and that he would be stepping out of the one-shot because he didn't feel comfortable with it. He claimed to have an intense porn addiction around 7 years ago, which would have made him about 13 or 14, and this non-binary character brought up too many bad memories from those times. This is mind-boggling to me. The NB character was flirtatious, sure, but the DM was being flirtatious to me and the monk's characters. And the rogue didn't even get a chance to roleplay their character yet. How is a non-binary character related to a porn addiction? I just don't see the connection. Normally, I'm not the kind of person to question someone when they talk about their mental health issues. I totally get that trauma responses aren't something you can control, and triggers can be anything under the sun. But this excuse just sounds like complete bullshit, at least to me. It really seems like this guy just hated non-binary people, and came up with an excuse to not play with someone even pretending to be one in a fantasy game. But whatever. I truly still don't know if this was, in fact, the real reason why he dropped out of the one-shot. Maybe he hated the orc wizard character so much he refused to play. Or maybe he really didn't want to do any puzzles. Or maybe he really did have trauma related to non-binary people. Nevertheless, the DM didn't end up playing, and the rest of us had a wonderful time. He gave the excuse that he wasn't having a good day, and we were free to puppet his character if we wanted. I only learned about the non-binary stuff much, much later. I was partially relieved when he opted out at the time. It made my job much easier, and allowed the session to move a bit faster than the Halloween one. My one-shot was much more exploration-based and puzzle-focused, which most of us had been starved of for the entire campaign. We all ended up having a good enough time, and I actually had fun as a first-time DM. However, the very next day after my one-shot, there was the DM's holiday session. He hyped it up a fair bit, talking about how we were going to kill Santa Claus, and how epic it was going to be. His session was the direct polar opposite of mine. It was a huge railroad, with our characters literally being warped to another dimension, and the NPC character guiding us the entire way. We had little say in anything, as we moved from set piece to set piece, with loose reasoning as to why. The most egregious moment, however, was the boss. Santa Claus was in a sleigh, high off the ground. The DM made him a 20th level spellcaster to face our 9th level party, and used a character sheet instead of a monster stat block. He was a warlock and shadow sorcerer multi-class, and it was by far the most bullshit thing I've ever encountered. Every time we tried to do anything, we got constant pushback. With the sleigh mechanic, the DM essentially made a 3D fight on a 2D map. This caused so much confusion and arguments about where people were in physical space. Everything we'd do seemed to do nothing. Cast a spell at him? Magic resistance. Try to slash at him? Legendary resistance. He would use sorcery points to immediately succeed on saving throws, or shut down any magic we tried to pull. He was just far enough off the ground, so that it negated the monk and the fighter's abilities to protect against fall damage. Oh, you want to push him off the sleigh? And you got a natural 20? Oh yeah, you knock him off. But he's just going to Misty Step right back onto the sleigh on his next turn. It was practically torture. Yes, it was all according to the rules, or so he claimed, but it was really unfun to fight. This whole melee lasted for 4 hours, and it was a slog the entire time. All during this fight, the DM decided to use this dubstep Christmas music from Saints Row, and having that track loop for 4 hours straight got on my last nerve. The worst part was, when my character finally managed to kill him, the boss immediately came back to life. The DM was using mythic traits from Theros, and made the boss immediately resurrect with full health. Even if our DM planned to use mythic traits from the beginning, I don't think he should have gone through with it after all this. Keep in mind, by this point, it had been 4 straight hours of us fighting this guy. 2 of our party members had died, and the rest of us were close to being downed already. After Santa resurrected, he cast Meteor Swarm, and it led to an instant total party kill. Remember when I mentioned his homebrew ruling about character death and how we're allowed 1 more turn before we died? Well, since it was a TPK, we all got really overpowered last turns, and we were able to kill him. Plus, the DM made it clear that if our characters died in the holiday session, it wouldn't have any effect on our normal campaign. But the cherry on top of this whole miserable affair was that he said that since it was a bittersweet victory, that we would only get half XP. So we fought this thing for, may I remind you, 4 hours. We're just barely able to kill it, and we're only getting half the credit. And then afterward, he made us feel like crap about beating it. The whole fight, he made comments about how, there's a way to beat this, you just need to figure it out, etc., ad nauseum. It really felt like he was taunting us with it. Once the fight was over, he then revealed to us that we could have easily beaten him if I had just taken the Repelling Blast Eldritch Invocation to knock him off his sleigh reliably instead of having to make strength checks to do so. It felt like he was blaming me directly as to why the fight was so hard, trying to justify the difficult battle. Sure, we got some Christmas gift magic items out of the whole affair, but it did nothing to sweeten the bitter taste the session left in our mouths. The difference between my one-shot and his was like night and day. It didn't help that I ran mine the day before he ran his, so it added more insult to injury. We had a whole discussion about it as players after the fact without him, talking about our DM's problems and how we didn't want to play any more one-shots with him if they were going to be like that. It was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and the tipping point for most of the people in our group. We all talked about his multiple issues as a DM, not just the failure that was the holiday session. We kept venting to each other, and it really was a wake-up call. So, we all decided to put D&D on hold for 2 weeks during the holidays directly afterward. It was supposed to signify us giving him one last chance. If we came back and there still wasn't any improvement after a while, then we would take action. The holidays passed, and soon we were back to playing D&D again. 2 extremely railroady sessions later, including one where the DM tried to work his version of vehicles into D&D, and it went disastrously. The bow finally broke. Our monk player decided to leave, citing work and school as her reasoning. The fighter asked to leave shortly after. The DM asked me in a private message if I was having fun with the campaign, and I was honest. I laid it out and told him my problems, in a delicate way. I didn't want to scare him off of DMing, so I was gentle with it. He then went into the Discord server and went on a meltdown tirade, asking why we all hated his campaign and why we didn't speak up sooner. Which, I'm gonna point out, Everybody did speak up over the course of time, and he would even ask for criticism, and whenever they would give it, he would ignore them. When we made it clear we wanted the campaign to end because we were going in different directions as to what we wanted out of it, he acted as if the world was ending. He was almost like a manipulative boyfriend, begging for the rest of us to take him back, that he'll do better next time, and so on. He offered to run modules, to do anything in order for the group to stay together. Keep in mind, this happened during the middle of the day during the week, when almost everyone was busy and at work, so it mostly consisted of him ranting on the server, asking why and how this could have happened. The rogue and I popped in when we had time to spare, talking with him and trying to show him why we were dissatisfied and that there weren't any hard feelings. I think he took it really personally, which I understand to a certain extent, but it went to a ludicrous extreme. The rogue suggested we do one last session to send everyone off, but the DM was having none of it. He mentioned that if he did run a last session, it would only be with the monk and the sword mage, which he previously confessed to being his favorite players. He made excuses that he owed them or some shit, but it's clear he just thought the rest of us hated his guts because we were trying to get him to improve. He deleted the server immediately after his tirade, after making a promise not to delete it until midnight, mind you, and then sent all of us private messages about how he had failed all of us, and blah blah blah. It felt like he was throwing a bit of a pity party for himself, constantly putting himself down, and making us feel obligated to give him reassurance. He blocked Rogue and Fighter, but he hasn't blocked me as of yet, but I'm sure a block is on the way if he manages to find this. Even after all this, I'm not sure I still hate our DM. He was a chill guy, and we talked and related to each other a lot, but he was just way too stubborn and unwilling to cater to our needs. If you are listening to this, DM, you already know who I am, and you're wondering why I'm the one out of all of us who wrote this. You really need to learn how to take criticism, how to respect boundaries, and how to read a room. You need a group that wants to play in a sci-fi world, that wants hard combat encounters and crazy optimized builds. That group wasn't us, and that's the honest truth. Also, you maybe shouldn't make creepy comments to women during roleplay without at least asking if it's okay first. Just maybe. No, there's no maybe about that. I do understand why the DM is upset. He felt like he was running the best game, but really he was running what he would want as a player. I feel he was flirty with the girls, because he was hoping that maybe they would flirt back with the characters. And that just made him look like a creep. If he was able to cut out being a creep, learn to do more proper balancing, and actually find a group that wants to play in a sci-fi game, I'm sure he would be a great DM. Taking criticism is hard to do. I should know. I have a YouTube channel. I hear from you guys a lot. You don't like the voices I do, you don't like the stories I read, you don't like the things I say, you don't like the editing I do, but I have to take those complaints into consideration and go, do I need to change that? My point being, it is very hard to take criticism. But when he is asking for criticism, and the players are giving him information and going, this is what we want, he shouldn't be complaining and going, why are my players upset and leaving? When they literally tell him what it is they want. Thespian, if you end up hearing this, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Hopefully I did your story justice, and you were able to go ahead and either DM your own games, or find somebody else to do so. That's gonna do it for today. And until next time, hope you feel inspired.